At 0630 hours local time, a swarm of Ukrainian Beaver drones was crossing the central Black Sea toward Russia's Tuapse oil terminal, including the deep water piers and tankers alongside it. While the mission had been routine so far, that would all change in a matter of seconds. Unknown to the Ukraine drone operators, 2 Russian Su-30 fighters had been flying their combat air patrol, basically a predetermined racetrack pattern in the sky where fighters wait for trouble, when their radar suddenly spotted something that shouldn't be there. The flight lead rolled his fighter into a sharp bank. 120 miles out meant they had maybe 12 minutes before those drones disappeared into the surface clutter where radar couldn't see them. 2 Su-30s dove toward 20,000 feet, throttles forward but not in afterburner. They needed every drop of fuel for what came next. At 90 miles, the lead pilot switched his radar from standby to active. Think of it like switching from a flashlight to a searchlight. Suddenly, he was painting the airspace ahead with powerful radar waves, looking for anything that would bounce them back. The screen showed nothing. He widened his scan pattern from 70 degrees to 120 degrees, trading refresh rate for coverage. It's like taking a panoramic photo versus a regular one. You see more, but with less detail. The problem was physics. The bar's radar you see here in the nose of the jet spotted targets measuring their Doppler shift, basically how their movement changed the frequency of reflected radar waves. It's the same principle that makes an ambulance siren change pitch as it passes you. Fast jets created huge Doppler shifts that scream, "I'm here," on the scope. But these drones? At 150 knots, they generated about as much Doppler shift as ocean waves. The radar's own filters, designed to hide sea clutter, were hiding the drones too. The tactical geometry made everything worse. Russia had positioned these fighters in what's called a cat box. Imagine a cube of airspace where fighters orbit, positioned to intercept threats approaching to the coast. But this box had been drawn for a different war. It assumed American bombers coming in high and fast, not Ukrainian drones crawling across the waves. From 30,000 feet, the fighters could see 200 miles with their radar. Impressive until you realize that slow drones at wave-top height might as well be invisible beyond 40 miles. At 0634, something flickered on the lead pilot's infrared search and track system. Not radar this time, but heat. A dozen-plus tiny warm spots against the cool morning sea, like seeing cigarette embers in the dark. 38 miles in closing. The drones had been flying at medium altitude to conserve fuel, but any second now they'd drop to the deck and vanish. The flight lead pushed his stick forward, diving hard. His radar altimeter unwound like a slot machine. 25,000, 20,000, 15,000 feet. The drones were starting their own descent, heading for the waves. He had seconds to get a shot off before they disappeared completely. The lead Su-30 rolled out of his dive at 12,000 feet, lining up with the lead cluster of drones. His gun pipper, the aiming reticule in his heads-up display, bounced across 3 separate targets as they began their pre-programmed descent. He squeezed off a 2-second burst from his 30mm cannon. The rounds traveled nearly a mile before one lucky shell connected with a drone, sending it cartwheeling into the sea. But the drones wouldn't let him get off another shot. At exactly 150 miles from Tuapse, the surviving drones executed their disappearing act. They dove from 2,000 feet to just 200 feet above the waves. From the Russian pilot's perspective, it was like watching coins drop into murky water. One moment he had solid returns. The next, his radar screen filled with surface clutter that looked like television static. The drones weren't just diving, they were spreading out. Half the swarm banked left while the rest continued straight, forcing the fighters to split their attention. The Su-30s only had enough fuel for one intercept attempt, and the drones were making them choose. Here's what made the drones nearly impossible to track now. Each Beaver carried a radar altimeter that bounced signals off the water 40 times per second, keeping them at exactly 60 meters altitude. When a wave rose beneath them, they climbed. When they crossed a trough, they descended. From the fighter's radar perspective, they literally merged with the sea surface. The radar saw them the same way it saw the waves, moving slowly, close to the water, creating tiny returns. The computer filtered them out as noise. The flight lead tried one more trick. He switched to velocity search mode, telling his radar to ignore everything except objects moving between 100 and 200 knots. This should have highlighted the drones against the stationary sea. Instead, his scope lit up with false returns. wind-driven spray, wave crests moving in the morning breeze, even a flock of birds skimming north. The drones were hidden in nature's own electronic camouflage. The wingman dropped lower, down to 8,000 feet, trying to get a better angle. But this created a new problem. Their fuel consumption at low altitude was tremendous. Those massive turbofans were optimized for thin air that's up high, not the thick atmosphere down below. Every minute at 8,000 feet burned as much fuel as 5 minutes at cruising altitude. They'd been airborne since 0430. The math was brutal and simple. Chase the drones low and run out of fuel, or climb back up and let them go. At 0637, ground control made the choice for them. The fighters pulled up, afterburners roaring as they climbed back toward their CAP station. In 5 minutes of engagement, they'd splashed exactly one drone. 23 continued toward Tuapse, now invisible to radar, following their pre-programmed routes toward the Russian coast. But the Russians weren't done yet. 53 miles inland from Tuapse, the S-300 battery's command post was tracking the handoff from the fighter patrol. The battery's crown jewel, the 64 N6E Big Bird surveillance radar, swiveled toward the threat bearing and switched from rotating search to focused sector scan. Imagine a lighthouse that normally spins in circles, suddenly focusing all its light in one direction. That's what Big Bird did with radio waves. The radar was massive, the size of a small building, pumping out 350 kilowatts of power. That's enough electricity to power 350 homes, all focused into finding those drones. On paper, it could spot a fighter jet at 300 kilometers. But these weren't fighters. Each Beaver drone had a radar cross-section about the size of a large seagull, maybe half a square meter. At that size, Big Bird's maximum detection range shrank to maybe 80 kilometers under perfect conditions. But these weren't perfect conditions. At 0640, the operator watched his screen with growing frustration. The contact count jumped wildly with each radar sweep. 12 drones, then 7, then 15, then 4. The automatic tracking system, designed to follow supersonic fighters and cruise missiles, couldn't maintain locks on these slow, tiny targets that kept dipping below the radar horizon. It was like trying to track a handful of leaves blowing across a pond. They'd appear, disappear, merge, separate, all seemingly at random. How this works physically is while the S-300's radar beam traveled in a straight line, it actually didn't because the Earth curves. At the Big Bird's antenna height of 25 meters, the horizon for a target skimming at 60 meters altitude was just 22 kilometers away. The drones would only be clearly visible to the engagement radar for about 3 minutes before they drop below the horizon completely. 3 minutes to track, identify, engage, and destroy 20-plus targets. The battery commander now faced an impossible choice. Each 48 N6E2 missile cost $2 million. Each drone cost maybe $50,000. If he fired at every possible contact, he'd bankrupt his ammunition stores chasing phantoms. But if he waited for perfect targeting data, the drones would reach Tuapse before he could engage. The mathematics of modern war. Sometimes the cheaper weapon wins simply by existing. At 0642, with the lead drone elements at 65 kilometers, the commander authorized engagement. He had to shoot now or not at all. The vertical launch tubes erupted in sequence, 4 missiles in 3 seconds, each one climbing on a pillar of flame that lit up the morning sky. The missiles didn't fly straight at the drones. Instead, they climbed steeply, trading speed for altitude in what's called a lofted trajectory. Think of it like a quarterback throwing a high arc pass over defenders. The missiles would climb to 15,000 meters, then dive down to the drones from above. From that angle, looking almost straight down, the drones would stand out against the water instead of hiding in the surface clutter. In theory, the missiles reached their apex and nosed over, their active radar seekers coming online. Somewhere below them, hidden in the morning haze and wave returns, were 23 drones. The seekers had 30 seconds to find them. The first 48 NE2 missile seeker painted the sea below with its radar beam, searching for anything that matched a drone's profile. 150 knots speed, half-meter radar return, 60 meters altitude. The problem was that from 15,000 meters up, the missile was looking at roughly 50 square kilometers of ocean. Finding a drone down there was like finding a specific car in a mall parking lot while flying over in a helicopter. Technically possible, but you needed to know exactly where to look. The missile's computer found something promising, a solid return moving at the right speed, slightly higher than the surrounding sea. It adjusted its fins, pulling 30 Gs as it curved toward the target. 8 seconds to impact. 5 seconds. 2 seconds. The proximity fuse triggered, sending hundreds of tungsten cubes through the air at supersonic speed. The target disappeared from radar. Success. Except it had been a drone that climbed briefly to avoid a fishing vessel's antenna. Pure bad luck for Ukraine. Pure good luck for Russia. The other drones stayed welded to their 60-meter altitude, invisible in the radar clutter. The second missile locked onto what looked like 3 drones flying in tight formation. It dove toward the center of the group. But as it descended through 5,000 meters, the group separated into individual wave crests moving at roughly the same speed as the drones. The missile had been chasing sea spray kicked up by the morning wind. It self-destructed harmlessly, its warhead creating a brief waterspout that no one saw. This was the fundamental problem with the S-300 versus sea-skimming drones. The system had been designed in the 1970s to stop American strategic bombers and fighter jets, big, fast targets that came in high. The idea of engaging 24 slow drones hugging the waves wasn't the original design specification. It was like using a sniper rifle to hunt mosquitoes. Theoretically possible, but practically useless. The third and fourth missiles had even worse luck. By the time they went active, the drones had executed another programmed maneuver, spreading out across a 20-kilometer front. What had been a concentrated swarm was now a dispersed cloud. The missile seekers, programmed to home in on the strongest radar return in their field of view, locked onto nothing. The technical math was devastating. 4 missiles fired, 1 drone destroyed, $6 million expended. At that exchange rate, Ukraine could afford to lose drones all day long. But worse for the Russians, the remaining drones were now inside 30 kilometers of the coast. They'd passed through the S-300's engagement envelope. The battery could fire more missiles, but at this range, the geometry was almost impossible. The missiles couldn't turn sharply enough to hit such low, slow targets. At 06:45, ground control reported 22 tracks continuing toward Tuapse. Russia's last line of defense wasn't missiles or fighters, but invisible radio waves designed to scramble their navigation. It would have to be enough. At 06:50, as the drone swarm crossed the 15-kilometer line from Tuapse, something strange happened to their navigation systems. The GPS receivers showed full signal strength, 12 satellites tracked, perfect geometry, excellent reception. But the position solutions made no sense. 1 second they were over the water, the next they were supposedly 500 meters inland, then back out to sea, then showing positions that would put them inside a mountain. The Pole 21 electronic warfare system had just turned on. Pole 21 isn't one massive jammer, but dozens of small transmitters scattered across Tuapse's industrial district. Each unit sat on a cellular tower, rooftop, or hillside, pushing out about 20 watts of precisely tuned radio noise. No more powerful than a desk lamp, but exactly on the frequencies used by GPS and GLONASS satellites. The drone's receivers, trying to pick up satellite signals from 20,000 kilometers away in space, instead heard the electronic equivalent of someone screaming in their ears from just a few kilometers away. But here's what made Pole 21 clever. It didn't just block GPS, it corrupted it. Each transmitter broadcast fake satellite signals with slightly different timing. The drone's receiver still thought it was navigating normally, running the same calculations it always did. 4 satellites gave 4 distances, and where those distances intersected was your position. Simple geometry that worked perfectly. Except the satellites were actually ground transmitters telling beautiful lies. The lead drone's autopilot detected GPS corruption within 2 seconds. Its navigation computer watched the position jumping around like a pinball and triggered its backup mode. The GPS was clearly compromised, so it switched to inertial navigation, basically dead reckoning using gyroscopes and accelerometers to track every tiny movement from the last known good position. But drone gyroscopes weren't military-grade instruments. These were commercial MEMS sensors, micro-electromechanical systems, essentially microscopic vibrating structures on a chip that could sense rotation. Accurate enough for short periods, but they drifted. Without GPS correction, the navigation would accumulate about 10 meters of error for every minute of flight. Over the 12 kilometers to Tuapse, that meant missing the target by a length of a football field. Ukraine's mission planners had anticipated this. They knew exactly where Russia's Pol-21 transmitters were located. Electronic intelligence flights had mapped them over months, identifying each transmitter's unique signal fingerprint. The mission profile assumed the last 15 kilometers would be GPS denied. That's why each drone carried something else, a camera and a simple pattern-matching computer. At 0651, the lead drone's cameras picked up Tuapse's most distinctive landmark, the catalytic cracking tower at the refinery, 140 meters tall with a distinctive red and white striped paint scheme. The pattern-matching algorithm compared this to stored images, found a match, and updated the navigation solution. The INS might be drifting, but now the drones knew exactly where they were relative to that tower. More visual landmarks appeared, the Y-shaped pier extending into the Black Sea, the geometric grid of storage tanks, the distinctive curve of the coastal highway. Each drone's computer compared what it saw to what it expected to see, correcting navigation errors in real time. It was crude but effective, using the landscape itself as a map. At 0653, the lead Beaver drone tipped into its final dive, its camera locked into the octagonal structure where 6 massive pipelines converged, the main export manifold that collected oil from the entire refinery complex. The inertial navigation system had drifted 47 meters east during the GPS-denied approach, but the visual lock pulled it back on course. The drone threaded between 2 flare stacks, their flames roaring just meters from its wingtips. The 40-kilogram warhead detonated on impact, shattering the manifold's valve assembly like a sledgehammer hitting a wine glass. Oil under 800 psi of pressure erupted from ruptured seals and broken flanges. The pressurized spray atomized into a fine mist that mixed with the morning air, creating an expanding cloud of explosive vapor that rolled across the facility like fog. 8 seconds later, the second drone found its target, a tanker moored at the offshore pier. The weapon punched through the deck plating near the cargo manifolds and detonated in the pump room below. The explosion didn't need to be massive. It just needed to break things. Pipes sheared, valves cracked, and vapor from 8 partially empty cargo tanks began mixing in spaces never designed to contain it. The ship's emergency shutdown system triggered, closing valves and stopping pumps. But physics doesn't care about emergency procedures. Vapor that's already escaped doesn't go back in the tank. Drones 3 and 4 targeted the pier's loading arms, those massive mechanical connections that transfer oil from shore to ship. Think of them as giant metal drinking straws, hinged and counterweighted so they can move with the tide. The drone impact sheared them off at their bases, sending tons of steel crashing onto the pier deck. But worse, the oil still in those lines, nearly 200 cubic meters, poured into the harbor, creating an expanding slick that reflected the morning sun in rainbow patterns. The remaining drones arrived in a deadly rhythm, each finding its pre-assigned target. Storage tanks split open, their contents spreading in burning pools. A pipeline bridge collapsed, dropping 3 stories onto a maintenance road. The administration building took a direct hit through its roof, the drone apparently locking onto the geometric pattern of the rooftop HVAC units. By 0655, the Tuapse facility was no more. Black smoke climbed into the morning sky, visible from space. The terminal that handled 8% of Russia's seaborne crude oil exports had been effectively eliminated from the logistics chain. Bye for now.